The desperate cry of a woman pierced the dusty air of Silver Creek as Katherine Rose stood on the auction block, her auburn hair whipping in the wind like a defiant flag against the injustice that had befallen her. It was 1876, a year that had started with promise but had quickly descended into despair after her father's unexpected death left the family ranch drowning in debt. Now, she faced the ultimate humiliation being auctioned off to the highest bidder in marriage, a common yet cruel practice in this harsh corner of Wyoming territory. $500 for the Rose girl, called out the bulbous-nosed auctioneer, his voice carrying across the crowd of men who had gathered in front of the courthouse. A fine investment for any man needing a wife to manage his household. Katherine's mother stood at the edge of the crowd, tears streaming down her weathered face. The drought had destroyed their crops, the bank had seized their land, and this barbaric arrangement was their last hope to avoid complete destitution. 600, shouted Bartholomew Tanner, the town banker who had foreclosed on their property. His small eyes glinted with victory as he stroked his meticulously trimmed beard. At 53, he was looking for his third wife, the previous two having succumbed to what the town doctor politely called nervous conditions. 700. Countered Edgar Willis, the saloon owner whose reputation for cruelty was matched only by his wealth. Katherine felt sick. At 22, she had always dreamed of marrying for love like her parents had. Now she was nothing more than merchandise, her future determined by the depths of men's pockets rather than the goodness in their hearts. $800. Tanner's voice boomed, causing a hush to fall over the crowd. It was an exorbitant sum that few in Silver Creek could match. The auctioneer's gavel hovered in the air, 800 going once, going twice. A commotion at the back of the crowd drew everyone's attention. A tall figure pushed through the throng of onlookers, the sun at his back casting him in silhouette. As he stepped forward, Katherine could make out a weather-beaten Stetson hat, a faded blue shirt beneath a leather vest, and eyes the color of a summer storm. $1,000 in gold, the stranger announced, his voice quiet yet carrying the weight of absolute certainty. The crowd gasped. Katherine's heart hammered against her ribs as the stranger approached the auction block, each step deliberate and measured. He wasn't from Silver Creek. She would have remembered a face like his strong jawline partially hidden beneath several days' worth of stubble, a straight nose that had clearly been broken at least once, and those eyes that seemed to see right through the charade playing out before him. "I ain't seen you around these parts," the auctioneer said, suspicious. "You got proof of them funds?" Without a word, the stranger tossed a leather pouch onto the podium. Gold coins spilled out, catching the sunlight and sending flashes of brilliance across the dusty square. The auctioneer picked up one of the coins, bit it, and nodded in satisfaction. "Looks like we got ourselves a new high bidder. Make it 1,200, Tanner sputtered, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. The stranger reached into his saddlebag and pulled out another pouch, heavier than the first. 2,000, he said calmly, then turned to face Tanner with a look that could have frozen the desert. "But it doesn't matter what figure you name because she's priceless." Katherine's breath caught in her throat. The stranger wasn't looking at her as property to be acquired or a burden to be endured. There was something in his gaze respect, perhaps even admiration. $2,000, the auctioneer exclaimed, eyes wide with disbelief. "Going once, going twice." "Sold to the gentleman in the Stetson." The gavel struck with finality, and Katherine felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She was now bound by law to marry a man she had never met, whose name she didn't even know. Yet somehow the prospect seemed less terrifying than it had moments ago. The stranger approached and extended his hand to help her down from the platform. "Name's Jackson Lawson," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "And I promise you this, I'll not lay a hand on you against your will. This arrangement goes no further than the papers we sign unless you decide otherwise." "Why?" Katherine whispered, searching his face for any sign of deception. "Why would you spend such a fortune on a stranger?" Jackson's gaze shifted briefly to the horizon. "Because no person should be bought or sold, no matter the reason." He glanced back at her, his expression softening slightly. And because I've been watching how you fought to save your family's ranch these past months, that kind of courage deserves a chance." Before Katherine could respond, her mother rushed forward, clutching her hands. "Oh, Katie," she sobbed, using the childhood nickname that Katherine had long outgrown. "I'm so sorry it came to this." "It's all right, Mother," Katherine said, though the words felt hollow. "Nothing about this situation was all right, Mrs. Rose," Jackson said, tipping his hat respectfully. "I give you my word your daughter will be treated with dignity. And what of our agreement?" Tanner interrupted, his jowls quivering with indignation. "The Rose debt was to be forgiven in exchange for the girl." Jackson turned slowly. "I'll cover their debt as well," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a negotiation. "Draw up the papers." As Tanner stormed off in a cloud of muttered curses, Katherine found her voice. "Mr. Lawson, I don't understand. You've now spent a small fortune on someone you don't even know." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Consider it an investment in justice, Miss Rose." He offered his arm. "Now shall we get these papers signed so you can be free of this nonsense?" Free was hardly how Katherine would describe her new circumstance. But as she took Jackson's arm and felt the solid strength of him beside her, she allowed herself to hope that perhaps this forced arrangement might not be the prison sentence she had feared. The town clerk officiated their hasty wedding ceremony an hour later in the cramped confines of his office. Katherine repeated the vows mechanically, her mind still struggling to comprehend the rapid turn her life had taken. By sundown, she was legally Mrs. Jackson Lawson, a name and title that felt as foreign to her as the man who stood beside her. "We'll stay at the hotel tonight," Jackson said as they stepped out into the cooling evening air. "Tomorrow we'll head to my ranch. It's a 3-day ride west of here." "What about my mother?" Katherine asked, suddenly alarmed at the thought of leaving her alone. "Already arranged," Jackson replied. "I've paid for her passage to your aunt's in Denver along with enough to keep her comfortable. The stage leaves tomorrow morning." Katherine stopped walking, forcing Jackson to turn and face her. "You seem to have thought of everything, Mr. Lawson. When you spend most of your life alone, you learn to plan ahead," he said simply. "And what exactly are your plans for me?" She asked, lifting her chin defiantly despite the tremor in her voice. Jackson studied her for a long moment. "Right now, my plan is to get you a hot meal and a good night's rest. Beyond that, Miss Rose, Mrs. Lawson, the decisions about your life remain your own." The hotel dining room was nearly empty when they entered, but the few patrons present still turned to stare. It wasn't every day that Silver Creek witnessed a bride auction followed by a wedding, particularly one involving a mysterious stranger who tossed around gold like it was hay. Over a meal of beef stew and fresh bread, Katherine attempted to learn more about her new husband. "You mentioned a ranch," Jackson nodded, breaking off a piece of bread. "The Horizon Ranch, about 15,000 acres along the Sweetwater River. Good grazing land, better than most in these parts." 15,000 acres, Katherine repeated, struggling to hide her shock. "That would make it one of the largest spreads in the territory, and you run this ranch alone." A shadow passed over Jackson's features. "I have a foreman, Miguel Rivera, and about a dozen hands. But yes, ultimately, the responsibility is mine. What brought you to Silver Creek? Surely not the prospect of finding a wife at an auction." Jackson set down his spoon, his expression guarded. "I came to buy cattle from your neighbor, Silas Gentry, heard about your situation in town. Couldn't just ride away." There was more to it than that, Katherine was certain, but she didn't press. She was too exhausted, too overwhelmed by the day's events to dig deeper into the mysteries of Jackson Lawson. After dinner, he escorted her to a room, her own room, she was surprised to discover. He had taken an adjoining one, but made it clear the connecting door would remain locked from her side. "Try to get some sleep," he said, lingering awkwardly in the hallway. "We leave at first light." Katherine nodded, suddenly tongue-tied. "Thank you," she managed finally, "for everything." Jackson simply tipped his hat and retreated to his own room, leaving Katherine alone with her thoughts and a future as vast and unknown as the western horizon. True to his word, Jackson was ready to depart as the first pale fingers of dawn stretched across the sky. Katherine had said her tearful goodbyes to her mother, who would be leaving for Denver later that morning. Though her mother had initially been skeptical of Jackson's motives, the fact that he had settled all their debts and provided generously for her journey had softened her concerns. "He seems honorable," her mother had whispered during their farewell embrace. "And Katie, a man who values a woman's worth beyond price is a rare thing indeed." Now, as Katherine approached the livery where Jackson waited with their horses, she wondered if her mother was right. Was there more to Jackson Lawson than his mysterious appearance and apparent wealth? "Can you ride?" he asked as she approached, gesturing to a chestnut mare with a white blaze down her nose. "Since before I could walk," Katherine replied, slightly offended by the question. She had grown up on a ranch, after all. A hint of a smile touched Jackson's lips. "Good. This is Penny. She's steady and smart, should suit you well." Katherine stroked the mare's neck, appreciating the sleek muscle beneath the glossy coat. "She's beautiful." "She's yours," Jackson said matter-of-factly, adjusting the straps on his own mount, a powerful black stallion. "Mine," Katherine looked up in surprise. "But we've only just met. You can't keep giving me things." Jackson paused, his hand stilling on the saddle. "Miss Rose, Katherine, I understand this situation is unusual, but the fact remains that you are legally my wife and what's mine is yours. That includes Penny." He resumed his work, avoiding her gaze. "Besides, every ranch wife needs a good horse." The mention of ranch wife sent a flutter of anxiety through Katherine's stomach. What exactly would her role be at Horizon Ranch? Would she be expected to cook and clean for a dozen ranch hands, share Jackson's bed? The thought made her cheeks burn, and she quickly busied herself with checking Penny's tack to hide her discomfort. They rode out of Silver Creek as the town was just beginning to stir. Katherine didn't look back. There was nothing left for her there but painful memories and humiliation. The first day's journey passed largely in silence. Jackson wasn't much for conversation, it seemed, and Katherine was too preoccupied with her own thoughts to force it. By midday, they had left the familiar territory around Silver Creek and entered a rugged landscape of rolling hills and scattered pine forests. "We'll make camp by that creek," Jackson said as the sun began its descent. It was the first thing he'd said in hours. Katherine dismounted, her legs stiff from the long ride. She was no stranger to hard work, but it had been a while since she'd spent an entire day in the saddle. "I can help with the fire," she offered, eager to prove her usefulness. Jackson nodded, already unpacking the provisions from his saddlebags. "There's a coffee pot in there. Creek water's clean enough." They worked in companionable silence, falling into a natural rhythm that surprised Katherine. By the time darkness had fully descended, they had a small fire crackling, coffee brewing, and a simple meal of jerky, beans, and hardtack ready to eat. "Where did you learn to make a fire like that?" Jackson asked, watching as Katherine expertly arranged the kindling. "My father taught me," she replied, the memory bittersweet. "He said a rose should never be helpless, no matter the circumstance." Jackson's expression softened. "He sounds like a wise man." He was, Katherine agreed, her throat tightening, until the drought came, then the bank loans. He started drinking, making bad decisions. She poked at the fire, sending sparks dancing into the night sky. "He shot himself 3 months ago." Jackson was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "Losing family that way, it leaves wounds that don't heal clean." There was something in his voice, a depth of understanding that went beyond mere sympathy. Katherine looked up, studying his face in the firelight. "You've lost someone too?" It wasn't a question, but Jackson nodded anyway. "My brother, 5 years ago." He didn't elaborate, and Katherine didn't push. They ate in silence, each lost in their own memories. After the meal, Jackson spread out his bedroll on one side of the fire, then laid out a second one a respectable distance away. "I'll take first watch," he said, checking his rifle before setting it within easy reach. "I'll wake you in a few hours." "Is that necessary?" Katherine asked, glancing nervously at the darkness beyond their small circle of firelight. "Probably not," Jackson admitted. "But I've learned it's better to be cautious than sorry." Katherine settled onto her bedroll, pulling the blanket up to her chin despite the mild evening. "Mr. Lawson, Jackson, may I ask you something?" He looked up, his face half in shadow. "You can ask me anything, Katherine." "I might not answer, but you can ask." She smiled faintly at his honesty. Why did you really come to Silver Creek? I don't believe it was just to buy cattle." Jackson was silent for so long that Katherine thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "I was tracking someone, a man named Fletcher Gaines." The name meant nothing to Katherine. "Who is he, the man who killed my brother?" Jackson's eyes reflected the dancing flames, turning them to molten silver. "I've been following his trail for 5 years." Katherine propped herself up on one elbow. "And you thought he was in Silver Creek?" "I had information he was working for Bartholomew Tanner." Jackson's mouth twisted in a grim smile. "Ironic, isn't it? I came looking for my brother's killer and ended up with a wife instead." The blunt assessment stung more than Katherine wanted to admit. "I'm sorry to have disrupted your plans," she said stiffly. Jackson's expression immediately softened. "That's not what I meant." He ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated with himself. "What I'm trying to say, poorly, is that sometimes life takes unexpected turns. I've been so focused on vengeance for so long that I've forgotten there might be other paths worth following." Katherine wasn't sure how to respond to that. Was he suggesting that marrying her was one of those paths? Or was she simply a detour on his journey toward revenge? "Get some sleep," Jackson said gently. "Tomorrow's ride will be longer." Katherine lay back down, but sleep eluded her for a long time. She kept replaying Jackson's words in her mind, trying to decipher their meaning. By the time he woke her for her watch, she was no closer to understanding the enigma that was Jackson Lawson. The second day of travel brought them into more mountainous terrain. The trail narrowed, forcing them to ride single file with Jackson in the lead. Katherine found herself studying the broad set of his shoulders, the confident way he sat in the saddle. Despite his grim quest for vengeance, there was something undeniably solid about him, a reliability that she found herself drawn to despite her best intentions. "We'll stop here for lunch," Jackson announced as they reached a small plateau overlooking a valley. The view was breathtaking, endless sky meeting distant mountains, with a silver ribbon of river winding through the valley floor. "It's beautiful," Katherine murmured, accepting the canteen he offered her. "This is still part of Wyoming territory," Jackson explained, sitting beside her on a sun-warmed rock. "But we're getting close to the border with Colorado." "Is that where your ranch is, Colorado?" Jackson shook his head. "Still Wyoming, but farther west. Good water, good grass. The winters are hard, but the land makes it worth it." There was genuine affection in his voice when he spoke of his ranch. Katherine found herself curious about this place that clearly meant so much to him. "How did you come to own such a large property?" Jackson unwrapped a package of jerky and offered her a piece before taking one himself. "My brother and I inherited it from our father. He was one of the first settlers in the region back in the 40s, built it from nothing." His expression clouded. "Luke and I had big plans to expand, maybe even start breeding horses instead of just cattle." "And then your brother died," Katherine said softly. Jackson nodded, his jaw tightening. "Fletcher Gaines was a hired gun working for the Pacific Railroad Company. They wanted our land for a new line. When we refused to sell, they sent Gaines to persuade us." His knuckles whitened around the canteen. "He shot Luke in the back while he was fixing a fence line, called it self-defense, claimed Luke drew on him first." "That's terrible," Katherine whispered, instinctively reaching out to touch his arm. "Were there no witnesses?" "None that would testify against the railroad." Jackson's voice was bitter. "The local sheriff was in their pocket. They offered to buy the ranch again the day after we buried Luke. I told them they could have it over my dead body." "So the railroad gave up," Jackson laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Hardly, but they underestimated how stubborn a Lawson can be. I hired men to guard the property, made it clear any railroad man who stepped foot on Horizon land would leave in a coffin." He glanced at her, perhaps worried he'd frightened her. "Eventually, they found an easier route. The railroad runs 20 miles south of the ranch now." "But you never forgot about Gaines," Katherine guessed. "How could I?" Jackson's eyes hardened. "He took more than my brother's life that day. He took our future, our plans. Everything changed." Katherine understood loss all too well. Her father's suicide had altered the course of her life irrevocably. "And if you find him, what then?" Jackson was silent for a long moment, staring out at the distant mountains. I used to think I knew the answer to that question, he said finally. Now I'm not so sure. There was a vulnerability in his admission that touched Katherine deeply. This man, who had appeared so certain and commanding at the auction block, was revealing doubts and regrets that made him suddenly, achingly human. We should move on, Jackson said abruptly, standing and brushing dust from his pants. There's a storm brewing in those mountains. I'd like to reach Johnson's Crossing before it hits. They packed up quickly and continued their journey, the comfortable rapport they had established during lunch fading as Jackson retreated once more into watchful silence. Katherine didn't mind. She had plenty to think about as Penny's steady gait carried her ever further from the life she had known. Johnson's Crossing turned out to be little more than a trading post with a small inn attached. The elderly couple who ran it welcomed them warmly, though their curious glances at Katherine's wedding ring and Jackson's protective stance didn't go unnoticed. Been married long? Asked the innkeeper's wife as she showed Katherine to a small but clean room. Very recently, Katherine replied, uncomfortable with the scrutiny. The older woman smiled knowingly. Ah, newlyweds, no wonder your husband looks at you like that. Like what? Katherine asked before she could stop herself. Like you're the water in the desert, dear. The woman patted her arm. My Harold looked at me the same way when we were first married, 50 years ago now. Katherine didn't have the heart to correct the woman's romantic assumptions. Let her believe in love at first sight and fairy tale endings. The reality, a desperate auction, a stranger's intervention, and a marriage of convenience was far less poetic. Dinner was a quiet affair in the inn's small dining room. The stew was hearty, the bread fresh, and for the first time in days, Katherine felt something close to relaxed. Even Jackson seemed less tense, exchanging pleasantries with the innkeeper about the condition of the trails ahead. You two are welcome to the parlor after dinner, the innkeeper's wife offered. Got a decent piano in there, not often tuned, mind you, but it does the job. Do you play? Jackson asked Katherine as the woman bustled away. A little, she admitted. My mother insisted on lessons, even though father thought it was a frivolous expense for a ranch girl. I'd like to hear you play, Jackson said, his expression softening in a way that made Katherine's heart skip unexpectedly. The parlor was cozy, with worn but comfortable furniture arranged around a stone fireplace. The piano stood in the corner, its wooden surface polished to a warm glow by years of loving care. Katherine sat tentatively on the bench, running her fingers over the yellowed keys. It had been months since she'd last played, the piano at home having been one of the first things sold to pay their mounting debts. She began with a simple folk melody, her fingers stumbling at first but gradually finding their rhythm. The tune was melancholy yet hopeful, a song her mother had taught her that spoke of love lost and found again. When she finished, she looked up to find Jackson watching her with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. That was beautiful, he said quietly. Thank you, she murmured, suddenly shy under his gaze. Do you play any instruments? Jackson shook his head. Luke was the musical one. He could play the fiddle well enough to make a man forget his troubles for a while. There it was again, that shadow of grief that seemed to follow Jackson like a faithful hound. Katherine wondered if he ever allowed himself to move beyond his brother's death, to experience joy without the immediate pang of guilt that followed. Tell me about your ranch, she said, hoping to steer him toward happier thoughts. What should I expect when we arrive? The change of subject worked. Jackson's expression lightened as he described Horizon Ranch, the sprawling main house built of local stone and timber, the bunkhouse where the hands lived, the barn his father had constructed with logs so massive it had taken 10 men to raise each one. And there's a garden, he added, almost as an afterthought. My mother started it. I've tried to keep it up, but I'm afraid I don't have her touch with growing things. The image of this hard man tenderly tending to his mother's garden made Katherine smile. Perhaps I could help with that, she offered. I've always had a knack for making things grow. I'd like that, Jackson said, his voice warming. The place needs a woman's touch, has for a long time. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the crackling of the fire the only sound in the room. Outside, the promised storm had arrived, rain lashing against the windows in heavy sheets. "We were lucky to reach shelter before that hit," Katherine observed. Jackson nodded. "The mountains can be dangerous this time of year. Storms come up fast and hit hard." He glanced at the grandfather clock in the corner. "It's getting late. We should turn in. One more day's ride tomorrow and we'll be home." Home. The word sounded strange to Katherine's ears. Horizon Ranch wasn't her home, not yet, perhaps not ever. But as she bid Jackson goodnight and retreated to her room, she found herself wondering if it might someday feel like one. The final day of their journey dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed away the dust and left the world feeling renewed. Katherine felt a flutter of nervous anticipation as they set out. By nightfall, they would reach Horizon Ranch, and she would begin her new life as Mrs. Jackson Lawson in earnest. "There's something I should tell you," Jackson said as they rode side by side along a widening trail, "about the ranch." Katherine glanced at him, concerned by the serious note in his voice. "What is it?" "It's not just me and the hands," he explained. "Miguel, my foreman, his wife Maria lives there too, and their children, 3 of them. The youngest is just 2. "I see," Katherine said, though she wasn't sure why this information warranted such a grave delivery. "Maria will have prepared a celebration for our arrival," Jackson continued. "She's enthusiastic about these things. I wanted to warn you." Understanding dawned. "You're worried I'll be uncomfortable with a welcome party." Jackson looked slightly embarrassed. "I sent word ahead about our marriage. Maria was excited. She's been after me to settle down for years." Katherine couldn't help but smile at his discomfort. "It's kind of her to prepare a welcome. I look forward to meeting her." Relief crossed Jackson's features. "She's a good woman, keeps the place running smoothly, makes sure the men are fed and the house is in order." "And what will my role be?" Katherine asked, the question that had been weighing on her mind finally finding voice. Jackson looked startled. "Your role as your wife," Katherine clarified. "What will be expected of me?" Jackson reined his horse to a stop, forcing Katherine to do the same. "Katherine," he said seriously, "I meant what I said in Silver Creek. This arrangement goes only as far as you want it to. You're not a servant or a possession. The ranch is as much yours as mine now." "But surely you must want something from this marriage," Katherine pressed. "No man spends a fortune on a wife only to treat her as a guest in his home." A complicated emotion flickered across Jackson's face. "What I want," he began, then stopped. "What I want is for you to feel safe, to have the freedom to choose your own path. If that path includes being a true wife to me someday, I would consider myself the luckiest man alive. But I won't demand it, and I won't rush you." The sincerity in his voice left Katherine speechless. In a world where women were routinely treated as property, Jackson's respect for her autonomy was nothing short of revolutionary. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Jackson nodded once, then urged his horse forward. "We should keep moving, still have a ways to go." As the day progressed, the landscape gradually changed. The rugged mountains gave way to rolling hills covered in lush grass. Cattle appeared, grazing contentedly in the distance, their hides gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Horizon cattle," Jackson confirmed when she asked. "We're on ranch land now." Katherine felt a surge of excitement. After 3 days of travel, they were finally approaching their destination. The anticipation must have shown on her face, because Jackson smiled a genuine, unguarded smile that transformed his features and made Katherine's heart perform an unexpected somersault in her chest. "Just over that rise," he said, pointing to a hill ahead. "You'll be able to see the house from there." They crested the hill together, and Katherine gasped at the view that unfolded before them. A wide valley stretched below, bisected by a gleaming river. Nestled against the base of a distant bluff stood a sprawling ranch house, constructed of golden stone with a wrap-around porch and multiple chimneys. Outbuildings surrounded it, a large barn, a bunkhouse, corrals, and various smaller structures. Smoke rose from the main house's chimney, a welcoming beacon in the late afternoon light. "It's beautiful," Katherine breathed. "It's home," Jackson said simply, but the pride in his voice was unmistakable. He pointed to various features as they began their descent into the valley. "The river provides water year-round. The Those hills to the north shelter the valley from the worst of the winter storms. The soil in the bottomland is rich good for growing just about anything. How many cattle do you run? Katherine asked, genuinely interested. About 2,000 head at present. Planning to expand to 3,000 next spring. He glanced at her. The ranch turns a healthy profit. You'll never have to worry about money again. The assurance should have been comforting, but it reminded Katherine of the circumstances that had brought them together. I never cared about money, she said quietly. Even before my father died when we had plenty. Jackson studied her face. What did you care about? Freedom, she replied without hesitation. The chance to make my own choices, follow my own heart. And now that choice has been taken from you, Jackson said, his expression somber. Katherine considered this. Has it? You've given me more choices than I had in Silver Creek. There, my only options were destitution or marriage to a man who saw me as property. You've offered me something different. A marriage in name only, Jackson clarified, until you decide otherwise. Katherine nodded, but as she looked at the man riding beside her, his strong profile outlined against the setting sun, the quiet dignity in his bearing, she wondered if such an arrangement would satisfy either of them for long. Their approach to the ranch house was heralded by the barking of dogs and the excited shouts of children. 3 youngsters raced toward them across the yard, followed more sedately by a woman with a round, smiling face and a colorful shawl despite the warm weather. Jackson dismounted and lifted Katherine down from her saddle with gentle hands that lingered perhaps a moment longer than necessary. Welcome to Horizon Ranch, he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. Before Katherine could respond, they were surrounded. The children danced around them, firing questions in a mixture of English and Spanish. The woman Maria, Katherine presumed, shooed them away with fond exasperation before turning a beaming smile on the new arrivals. Welcome home, Senor Jackson, she said, her English heavily accented but clear. Her dark eyes moved to Katherine, warm with approval. And this must be your bride. So beautiful, Katherine found herself enveloped in an enthusiastic embrace that smelled of cinnamon and chilies. Thank you for your welcome, she said when she was released. I'm Katherine. Senora Lawson, Maria corrected with a wink. Come, come, the celebration is ready and you must be tired from your journey. Indeed, the ranch yard had been transformed. Lanterns hung from posts, casting a golden glow as the daylight faded. Tables had been set up, laden with food and decorated with wildflowers. Ranch hands were already gathering, their work clothes exchanged for cleaner attire, their faces curious as they caught sight of their boss's new wife. A tall man with silver-streaked black hair approached, his handshake firm as he greeted Jackson. Welcome back, Chief. Everything is in order. Miguel, Jackson said warmly. This is my wife, Katherine. Katherine, this is Miguel Rivera, the best foreman in Wyoming territory. Miguel bowed slightly. An honor, Senora Lawson. My wife has not stopped cooking since we received the news. The evening passed in a blur of introductions, congratulations, and more food than Katherine had seen in months. The ranch hands were respectful, if curious, and Maria's children had appointed themselves Katherine's personal guides, eager to show her every corner of the ranch house when the opportunity arose. Throughout it all, Jackson remained close, a steady presence at her side. He didn't hover or control. Rather, he seemed intent on ensuring her comfort, quietly explaining relationships and ranch customs when needed, then stepping back to let her form her own connections. As the celebration wound down and the hands returned to the bunkhouse, Maria shooed her children to bed and began clearing the tables. Katherine moved to help, but the older woman firmly refused. No, no, Senora, tonight you rest. Tomorrow is soon enough to work. Jackson appeared at Katherine's elbow. Maria's right, it's been a long day. He hesitated. I can show you to your room if you're ready. Katherine nodded, suddenly aware of the bone-deep weariness that had settled over her. The emotional and physical journey of the past few days had taken more of a toll than she'd realized. The main house was as impressive inside as out. Solid furniture, much of it clearly handcrafted, filled the spacious rooms. Navajo rugs brightened the polished wood floors, and oil lamps cast a warm glow over walls adorned with a mixture of practical items and carefully chosen art. My mother had an eye for beautiful things, Jackson explained as he noticed Katherine admiring a particularly fine landscape painting. She believed that just because we lived far from civilization didn't mean we had to live without culture. She sounds like a remarkable woman, Katherine said. She was. Jackson's voice held both pride and old grief. She taught school back east before she married my father. Brought hundreds of books with her when they came west. They're in the library if you enjoy reading. You have a library. Katherine couldn't hide her delight. Jackson smiled at her enthusiasm. It was my mother's pride and joy. I've added to it over the years. He led her up a wide staircase to the second floor. Your room is here, he said, opening a door to reveal a spacious bedroom with a large 4-poster bed and windows that would catch the morning sun. It's lovely, Katherine said, stepping inside. A fire had been lit in the small fireplace, taking the chill from the evening air. Someone, Maria, most likely had placed a vase of wildflowers on the dressing table. My room is across the hall, Jackson said, lingering in the doorway, if you need anything. Katherine turned to face him, suddenly shy. Jackson, she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say. He waited, his expression open and attentive. Thank you, she said finally, for everything, not just the auction and the marriage, but for how you've treated me since. With respect and kindness, Jackson's eyes softened. You deserve nothing less, Katherine. The silence that followed was charged with unspoken possibilities. For a brief moment, Katherine thought he might step forward, might close the distance between them and take her in his arms. Part of her, a growing part, hoped he would. Instead, Jackson took a small step back. Good night, Katherine. Sleep well. Good night, Jackson, she whispered as the door closed between them. Katherine spent her first week at Horizon Ranch settling into a routine. Each morning, she woke with the dawn to help Maria prepare breakfast for the hands. The older woman had initially protested that such work wasn't necessary for the senora of the house, but Katherine had insisted. I need to feel useful, she explained. I've worked all my life. I don't know how to be idle. Maria had studied her thoughtfully, then nodded. Very well, but you work with me, not for me. Yes, it was a fair compromise. Katherine found she enjoyed the bustling morning activity, the smell of coffee brewing, the sizzle of bacon in the pan, the cheerful chatter in a mixture of English and Spanish as the men filed in for their meal, before heading out to the day's work. Jackson always took his breakfast with the hands, sitting at the head of the long table and discussing the day's tasks with Miguel. He treated his men with respect, listening to their input and acknowledging their expertise, and they clearly admired him in return. After breakfast, Katherine would help Maria with household tasks, then spend time in the garden. Jackson had been right, it needed attention. Years of minimal care had left it overgrown in some areas and barren in others. Katherine threw herself into its restoration, finding solace in the simple act of nurturing growing things. It was in the garden that Jackson found her on the afternoon of her 8th day at Horizon Ranch, kneeling in the dirt as she carefully planted seedlings Maria had given her. You've been busy, he observed, looking at the neat rows she had already completed. Katherine sat back on her heels, brushing a strand of hair from her face with the back of her wrist. It's therapeutic, she admitted. Putting things in order, helping them grow. Jackson nodded in understanding. My mother used to say the same thing. He hesitated, then held out a hand to help her up. I thought you might like to see more of the ranch today, if you're interested. Katherine accepted his hand, noting the way his calloused fingers enveloped hers with gentle strength. I'd like that very much. They rode out together, Penny matching the stride of Jackson's stallion as they crossed the valley and climbed into the surrounding hills. Jackson pointed out landmarks and boundaries, explaining the operation of the ranch in detail. Katherine listened attentively, asking questions that revealed her own knowledge of ranching practices. You know a lot about cattle, Jackson commented as they paused on a ridge overlooking a section of the herd. I grew up on a ranch, Katherine reminded him. Smaller than this, but the principles are the same. Do you miss it? Jackson asked, his gaze searching her face. Your home, Katherine considered the question. I miss what it was before my father changed, she said honestly. The good years when we were happy. But those were gone long before I left Silver Creek. They rode in companionable silence for a while, following a stream that wound through a stand of cottonwoods. The day was perfect warm sunshine, a gentle breeze, and the occasional call of a meadowlark breaking the quiet. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," Katherine said as they allowed their horses to drink from the stream. "That first day at the auction, you said I was priceless. Did you mean that, or was it just to outbid Tanner?" Jackson looked surprised by the question. "I meant it," he said simply. "No person has a price tag, Katherine, especially not someone like you." "Someone like me," she echoed, curious, strong, resilient, kind despite everything you've been through. Jackson's gaze was steady, earnest. "I watched you for days before the auction. Saw how you carried yourself with dignity even when the town was gossiping. How you put your mother's needs before your own. How you never broke, even when it seemed the whole world was against you." Katherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You make me sound like some kind of heroine, aren't you?" Jackson smiled, a rare full smile that transformed his face. "You survived. That takes courage." "So did you," Katherine pointed out, "after your brother died." Jackson's smile faded. "That was different. I had resources, options. You had none, yet you still faced life on your own terms." They remounted and continued their ride, circling back toward the ranch house as the afternoon waned. As they rode, Katherine found herself stealing glances at Jackson, the strong line of his jaw, the way the sun brought out golden highlights in his brown hair, the capable hands that held the reins with easy confidence. In the 2 weeks since he had appeared at the auction block and changed the course of her life, Jackson Lawson had revealed himself to be a man of integrity, kindness, and hidden depths. Katherine couldn't deny the growing attraction she felt toward him, an attraction that went far beyond gratitude for his rescue or appreciation of his physical attributes. But there was still a wall between them, a careful distance that Jackson maintained despite the increasingly comfortable rapport they shared during the day. Each night, he escorted her to her door, bid her a polite good night, and retreated to his own room across the hall. Each night, Katherine found herself lingering a moment longer, hoping for what? A kiss, an invitation. She wasn't entirely sure, but the ache of unfulfilled possibility grew stronger with each passing day. As they approached the ranch house, Katherine made a decision. Tonight, she would break through that wall. Tonight, she would tell Jackson that she was ready for their marriage to be more than a legal arrangement on paper. Dinner that evening was a quiet affair. Maria had prepared a special meal to celebrate Katherine's second week at Horizon Ranch: roast beef, potatoes with rosemary, and an apple pie that had the ranch hands groaning with appreciation. After dinner, Jackson suggested they sit on the porch to enjoy the mild evening. Katherine agreed, her heart beating a rapid tattoo against her ribs as she considered how to broach the subject that had been consuming her thoughts. They sat side by side in rocking chairs, watching as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear, brilliant against the darkening blue. "I've always loved the night sky out here," Jackson said quietly. "So clear, so vast, makes a person's troubles seem small by comparison." "Even the big troubles?" Katherine asked. "Like losing someone you love." Jackson was silent for a moment. "Even those," he said finally. "Not that they hurt any less, but the stars remind me that life goes on, that beauty persists even through grief." "Is that why you've been alone all these years?" Katherine asked gently. "Because of grief," Jackson's rocking chair stilled. "Partly," he admitted. "After Luke died, I was consumed with finding gains, didn't leave room for much else." He glanced at her, his expression hard to read in the gathering darkness. "And I suppose I was waiting. For what?" Katherine's voice was barely above a whisper. "For someone who would make me feel something stronger than vengeance." Jackson's voice was equally soft, but there was a certainty in it that made Katherine's breath catch. Someone worth building a future with. The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility. Katherine gathered her courage. "Jackson," she began, "I've been thinking about our arrangement." He turned to face her fully, his expression suddenly guarded. "Yes, you said that this marriage would go only as far as I wanted it to," Katherine continued, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he must hear it. that the choice would be mine. I meant it, Jackson said, his voice rough with an emotion Katherine couldn't quite identify. What if I've made my choice? Katherine stood, unable to remain still with the energy coursing through her. What if I want this to be a real marriage, in every way? Jackson rose slowly, his movements deliberate as he closed the distance between them. Katherine, he said, her name a caress on his lips. Are you certain? I don't want you to feel obligated. This isn't obligation, Katherine interrupted, finding boldness she hadn't known she possessed. This is choice, my choice. In the silver moonlight, Jackson's eyes shone with an emotion that made Katherine's heart soar. I've been falling in love with you since the moment I saw you on that auction block, he confessed, his voice raw with honesty, but I needed to know it was real for you too. That it wasn't just gratitude or a sense of duty. It's real, Katherine assured him, reaching up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw with gentle fingers. What I feel for you is more real than anything I've ever known. Jackson's arms encircled her waist, drawing her close. I promised myself I wouldn't rush you, he murmured, his breath warm against her cheek. That I'd give you time to adjust to make sure this is what you truly want. I don't need more time, Katherine whispered, tilting her face up to his. I need you, Jackson Lawson. Not just as my rescuer or my protector, but as my husband, my partner, the man I choose to love for the rest of my days. The last barrier between them dissolved as Jackson lowered his head and captured her lips in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened with the release of long, restrained passion. Katherine wound her arms around his neck, surrendering to the sensation of finally, truly coming home. When they broke apart, both breathless, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Katherine Lawson, he said, his voice husky with emotion. Not because I bought you or won you, but because you are, as I said that first day, truly priceless. In that moment, under the vast Wyoming sky with the man she had chosen to love, Katherine knew that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings could lead to the most perfect endings. What had started as a desperate auction had become a journey to true love, a love based not on ownership or obligation, but on mutual respect, shared courage, and the freedom to choose one's own heart's path. And as Jackson led her inside, his hand warm and certain in hers, Katherine silently thanked whatever twist of fate had brought this remarkable man to Silver Creek on the very day she needed him most.